Hey everyone, and welcome to the Eyes Like Film podcast. My name is Michael, and in today's episode, we're going to be talking about all things film. So go ahead and grab a cup of coffee, grab your camera, and let's get shooting. Before we get carried away creating art with analog photography, a good place to start is with understanding the film itself. So in today's episode, we're going to be talking a little bit more about film, a little bit of the history of film and how it works, and why artists like myself choose to shoot film instead of digital with the rise of computers and the accessibility of digital photography on all of our devices. So let's get started with some of the history behind how film got started to begin with. Fans of analog photography know that back in the early 1800s, photography first got its start thanks to photographic plates. And these plates were metal or glass, and they were coated with light-sensitive emulsion liquid, that chemical that would coat the glass, that when you exposed it to an image over several minutes would cast an image or a shadow onto that plate. Now once you developed that plate, you would then receive an image. But it wasn't until the late 1800s when actual film got its start, and it wasn't even until the 1900s when the plastic film and plastic cassette that we're familiar with today even became an industry standard. In fact, Kodak in 1959 finally squashed out all the competition with its safe film, the film that we recognize and utilize today. It wasn't even until the end of the 1950s when that transition finally took place. Of course, when film first hit the scene, black and white was the first and the only option available. In fact, it wasn't even until 1939 when color finally hit the scene in any kind of meaningful way. But today we have all kinds of options to select, and we can kind of take a look and see what those options are and why it's so special to shoot with film. So now that we've kind of discussed some of the history of film, it's kind of interesting to see what different options you have when it comes to shooting film. So unlike digital cameras where you can adjust settings and manipulate the image how you want to based on the various properties that the camera itself has, the only way to manipulate the properties of analog photography is by choosing a different type of film. So film comes from different manufacturers like Kodak or Ilford or some of the other movie cinematic type film producers, and Fuji even creates some film as well. But each film has its own types of characteristics. And those characteristics can be everything from the general hue of an image to the grain structure itself. So within the emulsion, how that grain structure combines to create the image. Each one of these individual films has a different characteristic to it, which makes it really fun to play around with when you're experimenting, when you're going out into the field and taking shots, really utilizing a different type of film to match the scene that you're shooting. Of course, we mentioned earlier there's different types of films. Black and white, of course, is an incredibly popular option. It's easy to develop and it's easy to scan at home instead of going to a lab and relying on specialized equipment. A few different options exist on the market. For example, this Pan 100 here, if you can kind of see it here, this is a fast speed film, so to work in this is a slow film. It'll work in really bright conditions, whereas this Ilford 3200 is going to be a better suited film for low light and dark conditions, because of the way that the grain structure is. It's less sensitive to light, so you can expose images for a lot longer amount of time without it causing a white image or a white frame. For color images, I recommend Kodak or Fuji. Fuji's a personal favorite. Kodak has a warmer hue. This is Kodak Gold. Of course, you have a Kodak Ultramax and Kodak Portrait 400, Kodak Portrait 800 are quite popular as well. All of those films kind of have a warmer hue to them, whereas a Fuji is going to have more of a green and a blue cooler feel to them, but they're colors still nonetheless. On the far end of the spectrum, you have the artistic type films. So we have an option here. This is Blue Ultra, as you can see. This is going to cast a very blue hue, and it's got a very unique ISO setting. We'll talk about that a little bit later. We also have other films like this black and white SFX film. This is actually infrared film. So when you shoot it, you're going to kind of have a weird distortion of colors. And I also have this other film here. This is kind of some movie cinefilm. This is really special because it has to go to a special lab. Only one place in the country still does it. And of course, another favorite of mine is the Cinestill 800, a tungsten balance film, which is really popular for nighttime street photography. So the different characteristics, there's a wide range of options that you can, a wide range of scenarios that you can play around with, and each of these films is going to be best suited for a different scenario. But you can also bend those rules a little bit and kind of stretch the capabilities and what you can capture with each of these films just because of the characteristics that they have. All right, we mentioned already a little bit about the ISO of the film. So you might be familiar with ISO on the digital cameras as a measure of light sensitivity. When you have a low ISO, you have very sharp, crisp images. It's a very low number because it's very sensitive to light. You need to shoot to those bright images really quickly, close the shutter speed within 1/500th, 1/1000th, or even faster shutter speeds. And on the other end of the spectrum, you could have very dim film that's suited for dim light, like this Delta 3200 is very well suited for low light photography, nighttime photography, just based on the light sensitivity emulsion that's covering the film itself. Because of that, you're stuck with that ISO for the entire roll of film. So if you're shooting 36 shots, like an Ilford is typically a 36 frame film here, at least in the 35 millimeter range, the film that you shoot is going to be that same ISO for the entire roll of film. You can push it here or there, and we can talk about what that means in future videos, where you manipulate the light sensitivity of the camera and how it adjusts to the film itself. But outside of that, the 200 here, for example, in this SFX, when you shoot that SFX, it's going to be the 200 for the entire roll, regardless of what you do, which really can put some constraints on your shooting, or it can create some artistic opportunities, depending on how you see that ISO setting. Personally, I love that you only are able to take a certain number of shots within that same ISO setting. I think that constraint isn't really a detractor, but really a benefit to really push the photographic eye to capture the most appealing images possible. We've talked a lot about the different types of films, the black and white films, the color films, even some special films, but I've mostly highlighted 35 millimeter film. Many people may also know it as 135. That's just the size of film, the millimeters across here, the frame size. There's obviously different types and different sizes of this film. This is the standard small, your common everyday camera is going to be 35 millimeter. More professional, higher grade cameras are going to be the medium format, 6x7, 4x5, 110, 120, and even the full frame 8x10 or 10x10 frames are going to be the larger and more professional. Ansel Adams, for example, used a full frame camera when he took all of his images. The larger the frame you get, just like in a digital camera, the larger the frame is, the larger the sensor is, the more detail you can capture on the negative, the film itself. So of course, the more detail you can capture, the bigger you can explode the images and still maintain the clarity and the detail of it. With the 35 millimeter, it's economical. You're more likely to find cameras that support 35 millimeter film. And it's just generally more easy to use for especially the beginner, and especially for somebody like myself who can't afford to go out and spend huge amounts on a medium format camera and then spend more money on only 10 frames, because of course the larger frames you get, the less shots you get on a roll, and of course the developing costs and scanning related to that, it just becomes too expensive. So 35 millimeter, that's my personal recommendation. If you're getting started into film, get started with the 35 millimeter. It's economical, it's easy to walk around to do street photography, and it's my personal preference when I go out and shoot film photography. We've covered a lot about what film is and what makes it special as an artistic medium. And I hope that this video enlightens you a little bit more into the differences and the nuances between each of the different types of films that you can load in your 35 millimeter camera. Of course, there's other options on the market for larger formats and almost endless supply of film that you can experiment with. So go out there, grab your camera, and get shooting.